In a small tower in 16th-century France, surrounded by books, Michel de Montaigne locked himself away from the noise of politics, the chaos of religion, and the endless chatter of human ambition. While the world around him burned with wars and dogma, he did something almost unthinkable for his time. He sat down and began to study the most mysterious subject in existence, himself. "I am myself the matter of my book," he wrote. In an age when people lived and died by the beliefs handed down to them, Montaigne dared to turn inward, to examine not what others thought, but what he himself truly felt and believed. He didn't preach, he didn't dictate, he reflected. And in doing so, he created something revolutionary, the modern way of thinking for oneself. Michel de Montaigne was not a philosopher in the academic sense. He didn't write systematic theories like Descartes or Aristotle. He didn't try to prove universal truths or invent a perfect system for living. Instead, he did something far more intimate. He observed himself, his doubts, his fears, his habits, his contradictions, and used his own humanity as a mirror for the world. He called his writings essay, meaning attempts. They were never meant to be final answers, only explorations. Montaigne believed that truth was not a monument to be built, but a movement to be lived. In this humble idea, that wisdom comes not from dogma but from curiosity, he helped shape the birth of modern individual thought. To understand Montaigne is to understand what it means to be truly alive and awake in one's own mind. He reminds us that the greatest freedom a person can have is the freedom to question. To question what they've been taught, to question what they see, and even to question themselves. He once said, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself." That is the essence of his philosophy, to belong to yourself, not to the crowd, not to authority, not even to your own fears or desires, but to your own mind. At a time when Europe was tearing itself apart over religion, Montaigne withdrew to his family estate and began to write about what he actually experienced as a human being. He didn't want to live inside the ideals of the church or the politics of kings. He wanted to understand what it meant to be human in all its confusion and fragility. He wrote about friendship, death, vanity, habit, and the passing of time. He wrote about the way our emotions deceive us, how our minds are constantly shifting, how we're often strangers to ourselves. He dared to admit that human beings are not rational creatures of reason and order, but living paradoxes, made of weakness, impulse, and wonder. This honesty was radical. In a world obsessed with certainty, Montaigne embraced uncertainty. He famously said, "What do I know?" Not as a statement of ignorance, but as a declaration of freedom. To say "I don't know" was not a confession of failure, it was the beginning of real understanding. Montaigne believed that to think for yourself, you must first admit that you don't have all the answers. Once you accept your limitations, you begin to see the world as it truly is, not as you wish it to be. We live today in a time that Montaigne would recognize all too well. We're surrounded by information, yet starved for wisdom. Everyone has an opinion, but few have reflection. We scroll, we react, we repeat, but how often do we actually think for ourselves? Montaigne's world had dogma, ours has algorithms. His was ruled by priests and kings, ours by trends and screens. And yet, the danger is the same. When you stop thinking for yourself, you stop being truly alive. Montaigne invites us to reclaim our inner independence. He doesn't tell us what to think, but how to think, slowly, honestly, and with curiosity. He believed that thinking was not a weapon or a performance, but an act of self-discovery. To think was to know who you are beneath the noise. That's why his essays are full of contradictions, doubts, and sudden changes of thought. he wasn't afraid to change his mind. He understood that the mind, like life, is always in motion. "I do not portray being," he said. "I portray passing." For him, the self wasn't a fixed identity, it was a river, always flowing, always changing, and to live truthfully was to flow with it, not against it. Montaigne's genius was in transforming ordinary experience into philosophy. He wrote about sneezing, about sleep, about the habits of animals and the behavior of his cat. But through these small reflections, he revealed the great truths of human existence, that our wisdom comes not from escaping life, but from paying attention to it. He believed that every person, no matter how ordinary, could find depth and meaning in their own experience if they dared to look closely. That is why his work feels timeless, because it's about you, me, and everyone who has ever wondered, who am I, really? One of Montaigne's greatest lessons is humility. He saw that human beings are full of contradictions, and he wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. He made mistakes, and he admitted them. He was biased, and he confessed it. He believed that philosophy wasn't about being right, it was about being real. In a world full of people pretending to know everything, Montaigne dared to say, "I know nothing." And that made him wiser than most. He also taught us the art of living well, not through wealth, status, or control, but through self-awareness. He understood that happiness doesn't come from escaping life's pain, but from understanding it. "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to live to yourself," he wrote. To live to yourself means to live in alignment with your nature, not pretending, not performing, but simply being who you are. He believed that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was a chance to meet yourself. In solitude, you discover your own voice, free from the noise of others. You learn to see your thoughts clearly, and through them, the world more deeply. Montaigne's skepticism wasn't cold or cynical, it was compassionate. He didn't doubt for the sake of destruction, he doubted to make space for truth. He believed that when you stop taking everything as certain, you open yourself to wonder. You become more tolerant, more humble, and more human. In his essays, you can feel his warmth, his curiosity, and his deep empathy for human imperfection. He understood that people are inconsistent, that life is unpredictable, and that wisdom is found not in control, but in acceptance. We often think of philosophers as distant figures dealing with abstract ideas. Montaigne brings philosophy back to life. He reminds us that philosophy begins with experience, with eating, walking, loving, aging, and dying. He believed that to understand the human condition, we must look at ourselves not as saints or heroes, but as flawed, feeling beings trying to make sense of a mysterious world. His writing feels like a conversation with an old friend, one who doesn't judge you, but helps you see yourself more clearly. To think for yourself, Montaigne teaches, is not to isolate yourself from others, but to become conscious of how easily we are shaped by them. He warned against living through borrowed opinions. He wrote, "We are all patchwork, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each bit, each moment, plays its own game." He wanted us to realize that we are made of fragments, some our own, some from others, and that the task of life is to weave those fragments into something authentic. That's why he constantly examined his own contradictions, not to eliminate them, but to understand them. To think for yourself is not to be perfect, it's to be aware. In our age of collective thinking, Montaigne's message is more urgent than ever. Every day, we're told what to think, what to like, what to fear, what to want. It's easy to become part of the crowd, to trade thought for belonging. But Montaigne reminds us that true belonging begins with authenticity. You cannot connect deeply with others until you first know who you are. You cannot be free until you think freely. You cannot live fully until you live consciously. He didn't offer answers to life's biggest questions, he offered a way to live with them. That's what makes his work so modern. He knew that the world is uncertain, that truth is slippery, that people are fallible, and instead of despairing, he embraced it. He found peace not in certainty, but in acceptance. His wisdom wasn't about escaping confusion, but about dancing with it. He once said, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." With this gentle humor, he exposed how our fears are often illusions of the mind, and how freedom begins when we stop believing them. Montaigne's tower, where he wrote his essays, still stands today. Its walls were covered with quotes from the classics, reminders of the wisdom he cherished, but the real library, he believed, was the human mind itself. His life's work was to study that library, to explore its dark corners, and to share what he found. He believed that to know the world, you must first know yourself. And that self-knowledge is not a destination, but a lifelong practice. If Montaigne were alive today, he would probably tell us to put down our phones, step away from the endless noise, and spend time with our own thoughts. He would remind us that self-reflection is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Because without it, we drift through life repeating the thoughts of others, living someone else's story instead of our own. To live and think for yourself is to reclaim your humanity, to wake up, to feel, to question, and to see. In a world obsessed with certainty, Montaigne's voice whispers something timeless: it's okay not to know. It's okay to be wrong, to change, to wonder. The real strength lies not in having answers, but in the courage to ask honest questions. The real wisdom lies in seeing life not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to experience. So perhaps, the next time you find yourself lost in confusion or doubt, remember Montaigne sitting in his quiet tower, asking the same question we all must face: what do I know? That question doesn't lead to despair, it leads to freedom. Because when you begin to see that your beliefs are just attempts, your opinions just reflections, and yourself just a flow of thoughts and feelings, you stop clinging, and you start living. You stop pretending to know, and you begin to understand. Montaigne's greatest gift to humanity was not a philosophy of the mind, but a philosophy of the heart. He showed us that to think for yourself is not to stand above others, it's to see yourself in them. To live well is not to master life, but to meet it with honesty. And to know yourself is not to build an identity, but to be open to everything you are, and everything you are still becoming. In the end, Montaigne's legacy is simple yet profound: life is an experiment, not a performance. Think deeply, live gently, question freely, and belong to yourself.